So welcome to our second lesson on the text Twins and Early Study. Now, if you remember, in our first lesson, we did the pre-reading and we looked at all of the eye-catching features in the text, and we know that we're going to be reading an early study about twins that was conducted by Francis Galton. Okay. So in our lesson today, we are going to do some close reading, which actually means we're going to read a lot more texts. We're going to read paragraphs 1 and 2, and we're going to be focusing on components of research, כן? המרכיבים של מחקר. Now, what are they? We have the rationale, the purpose, the hypothesis, the method, and the subjects. Now, if not all of this is clear to you right now, by the end of the lesson, you'll already know what all of these items are. Okay, so don't worry. So, let's look at the first paragraph, and let's read the first question together. Why was Galton interested in twin studies? Now remember, the question asks why, למה, מאיזו סיבה? Why was Galton interested in twin studies? למה זה עניין אותו בכלל לחקור תאומים? We're going to pause here and read some of the first paragraph and look for the reason he was so interested in twin studies. So in order to answer the question, we already know that you should look for key words from the question in the text. So I'm sure that you noticed in the second sentence of paragraph 1, it says, Galton was interested in twins because of the light that a study of them might throw on the relationship between heredity and environment. So I'm sure that you noticed the word interested in the text. So it says here, Galton was interested in twins because of, בגלל. So here we're getting the reason, הסיבה למה הוא התעניין במחקר הזה. And of course, he's interested in this because he can understand better the relationship between heredity and the environment. כן, הוא יכול להבין טוב יותר את הקשר בין תורשה לסביבה. Okay? So also notice the phrase, the light might throw on. כן? To throw a light on something means להאיר. Okay? אז ממש בתרגום מילולי זה אומר בדיוק מה שאומר בעברית. אז שוב פעם, גלטון חקר את הנושא של תאומים כי זה יכל להאיר או להסביר לו על הקשר בין תורשה לסביבה. יפה, so as I said, notice the word because, and again, the writer is repeating the connection between heredity and the environment. Okay, so now let's look at another question from the first paragraph. And the question is, what was Galton's main objective for conducting studies on twins? Okay. Now, the important word here in the question is the word objective. Objective means matara, and by this stage, we already have a number of synonyms, מילים נרדפות למילה objective. Okay, so it is the word goal, כן, כמו בכדורגל, אותו דבר, goal זה מטרה. Aim, again, means מטרה, and the word purpose. So all three of these words and the word objective mean the same thing. So now let's look back at the question. What was Galton's main objective, כן, המטרה העיקרית שלו, for conducting studies on twins? Okay. So we're going to pause and try and think what was Galton's main purpose for studying twins? So as we did in previous questions, we're looking for an objective. So in the text, I would look for a word that is similar. And I'm sure that you noticed in the third sentence, it begins with his chief object. Okay? His chief object, המטרה העיקרית שלו. של מי כמובן? של גלטון, כי עליו דיברו במשפטים הקודמים. Okay? So his chief object was to determine whether, לקבוע האם. גם זה שפה של מטרה. מה הוא יצא לעשות או לחקור? He tried to determine whether. ניסה לקבוע האם. Okay, what did he try to determine? To determine whether or not very similar twins become unlike as a result of a difference in environment, and whether, on the other hand, והאם מצד שני, twins who were unlike in early life become more similar as a result of living in the same environment. Okay, so we have two sides of his objective. כן, יש לנו שני צדדים למטרה שלו. בואו ננסה להבין כל צד. So at the beginning he was trying to see if very similar twins, האם תאומים מאוד מאוד דומים או תאומים זהים, הופכים להיות לא דומים כתוצאה משינוי בסביבה שלהם. כן? למשל תאומים שגדלים בסביבות שונות. And on the other hand, מצד שני, הוא רצה גם לבדוק to see whether, okay, twins who were unlike in early life, תאומים שהם לא היו תאומים זהים, okay, או שהם לא היו דומים בגיל מאוד מאוד צעיר, become more similar as a result of living in the same environment. האם דווקא הם הופכים להיות יותר דומים כתוצאה משהייה בסביבה דומה. Okay, so that is, or was, Galton's main objective for conducting studies on twins. Okay, so now we already know why he was interested in twin studies. Okay, right? To check the relationship between heredity and the environment. We also know what was his main objectives. כן, אנחנו יודעים גם מה המטרה העיקרית שלו. Now we're going to look at what was Galton's hypothesis. Okay? Hypothesis here means השערה. What was Galton's basic assumption? מה הייתה הנחת היסוד של גלטון? What did he believe? ומה הוא האמין? So we're going to pause here and read the rest of paragraph 1 and try and think what was his hypothesis. Okay, so notice the beginning of the answer. Galton believed, כן, הוא האמין, זה איזושהי השערה או הנחה שלו. Galton believed that there were two distinct types of twins. כן, הוא האמין שישנם שני סוגים מובחנים של תאומים. One which developed from a single ovum, כן? סוג מסוים של תאומים שהתפתחו מביצית אחת, okay? And the other type of twin, of course, from two separate ova, כן? והסוג השני של תאומים משתי ביציות שונות. עכשיו, תזכרו שזה מחקר מקדים ומוקדם, זה לפני שבאמת הבינו כיצד תאומים שונים, או סוגים שונים של תאומים נוצרים. Okay, so this is actually very groundbreaking. זה מחקר מאוד מאוד חדשני, וזאת האמונה של גלטון. So this was his hypothesis, זאת הייתה ההשערה שלו. Okay, so now let's continue with Galton's study, and we're going to look at the following question. How did Galton collect information for his study? Okay. So how did he collect information? Try and think about in which ways, or what was the method, באיזו שיטה הוא אסף את האינפורמציה, מה הוא עשה כדי להשיג אינפורמציה על התאומים שהוא חקר. So let's pause right now and look for the answer in the text. Okay, so now let's focus on the words the evidence, הראיות או ההוכחות, on which Galton based his conclusions, כן, על איזה ראיות הוא ביסס את המסקנות שלו, consisted of reports of the characteristics of the twins, which he obtained at second hand through correspondence. Okay, so what you should have been focusing on is how did he get the evidence? He got the evidence that he studied, okay, through second hand, through correspondence, כן, דרך התכתבות. הוא בעצם קיבל את המידע על אודות התאומים שהוא חקר, דרך דיווחים של אנשים אחרים. בסדר, תזכירו שוב, זה מחקר מאוד מאוד מוקדם, אחד מהראשונים, אם לא הראשון, על תאומים. Okay, so now we're continuing with questions about his research. In this case, who were the people that Galton studied? כן, מי היו האנשים שהוא חקר? אני בטוחה שאתם כבר יודעים את התשובה. But we're going to pause here and continue reading paragraph 2 and look for the specific types of people that he studied in his research. Okay, so let's read the answer together. He got information about 35 pairs of twins who were reported to be so closely similar that it was difficult to distinguish one from the other. Okay, so he studied twins who were very similar. Now notice the words he also, hu gam. Now when you see the words also, it means that the writer is continuing to give the same type of information, so you should continue reading when you see the words also. So besides twins that were similar, he also got information about 20 pairs who were not so closely similar. Okay? So we have also pairs that were not similar. כלומר, הוא חקר תאומים שהם מאוד מאוד דומים, והוא חקר תאומים שלא היו כל כך דומים. Okay? Now, we're going to continue looking at the people that Galton studied. And we already know from the last sentence of paragraph 2, we can understand that Galton studied two groups of twins. הוא חקר שתי קבוצות של תאומים. Okay? So let's read the last sentence together again. It is probable, זה אפשרי, in the light of our later evidence, that the twins of the first group were chiefly identical twins, and that those of the second group were chiefly fraternal twins. Okay? So from this last sentence, we know that Galton studied two groups. Okay? And let's look at the question. It says here, from what you have already read, in paragraph 2, how many twins were there in the first group, and how many twins were there in the second group? So let's look at the table together. We know that the first group were the identical twins. בקבוצה הראשונה היו התאומים הזהים. And in the second group, we have the fraternal twins. Fraternal twins means תאומים לא זהים. Okay? Remember that. תאומים לא זהים, תאומים שנראים כמו אח ואחות רגילים. Okay, so now we're going to pause right now and go back in the text and look for how many identical twins were in the first group and how many fraternal twins were in the second group. So in this case, what did you have to do? You had to go back in paragraph 2 and look for where were they talking about two different groups. So as you can see, the first group of twins were 35 pairs of twins who were reported to be so closely similar that it was difficult to distinguish one from the other by their appearances. So the first group were twins that were very, very similar, the identical twins. Okay? He also obtained reports concerning 20 pairs who were not so closely similar and who were thought by their friends and relatives to be no more alike than our brothers and sisters in general. And he also, of course, in the second group, studied twins that looked like regular brothers and sisters. So now we have the numbers for both groups. The first group, of course, had 35 pairs of twins, and the second group had 20 pairs of twins. Okay, now this brings us to components of research. רכיבים של מחקר. Now, all of the questions that we've done until now were connected to Galton's research. Now, let's look at the names for each of the components. אנחנו נסתכל על השמות, איך אנחנו קוראים לכל אחד מהרכיבים של מחקר. So we had the question, why was Galton interested in twin studies? מה הסיבה שהוא התעניין במחקרי תאומים? This is what we call the reason or the rationale for research. כן, הרציונל למחקר. מה זאת אומרת הרציונל? כן? ההסבר לכתיבה או ההצדקה למחקר. Okay? He was interested in twin studies because they can explain a lot about the connection between heredity and the environment. אז פה הוא הצדיק למה כדאי לחקור את הנושא של תאומים. רציונל. Okay? Now let's look at the second question that we did together. What was Galton's main objective for conducting studies on twins? Now remember that we said the word objective means purpose, מטרה. So here again we have the purpose of research, כן, המטרה של המחקר. Now usually when you're looking for a purpose in the text, you look for these words, you look for these verbs, הפעלים האלה, to study, כן? החוקרים רצו לחקור משהו, to show, להראות משהו, להראות תופעה מסוימת, to determine, לקבוע משהו, or to see whether, לבדוק האם. All of these words can tell you that the text is talking about purpose. Okay? מדברים על מטרה. Then we had the question, what was Galton's hypothesis? Now, of course, this question already tells you what is the research component. The research component is hypothesis, השערה. כן, במחקר אנחנו הרבה פעמים מקבלים את השערת החוקרים, שזו בעצם הנחת היסוד. זה משהו שעוד לא מוכח, ולכן גם השפה היא תהיה אולי לבדוק האם, יכול להיות ש, okay? Because it's, again, it's not proven, זה לא משהו מוכח. Then we also had the question, how did Galton collect information for his study? כן, איך הוא אסף את האינפורמציות, המידע למחקר שלו? זה נכנס לתוך הקטגוריה של השיטה, the method. Okay, what was the method that Galton used to collect information? Now, other methods that you should focus on are an experiment. כן, אפשר לערוך ניסוי כדי לאסוף אינפורמציה. You could give out questionnaires, מהמילה question, שאלונים. You could conduct interviews, אפשר לערוך ראיונות. Or you could also give out surveys, כן? לחלק או לעשות סקר. So these are just some of the additional methods that you might find in a research study. And last but not least, we also had the question, who were the people that Galton studied? כן? מי היו האנשים שהוא חקר? And the word for who were the people, of course, are who were the subjects. מי היו הנחקרים או הנבדקים. Now, I know that you know the word subject בתור נושא. עכשיו, זה נכון, זה באמת המילה נושא. אבל כשאתם רואים את המילה subject, או את השאלה who were the subjects, בטקסט של מחקר, אז רוב הסיכויים שמדברים פה באמת על הנבדקים או הנחקרים, ולכן גם כן הרבה פעמים במילה הזאת אתם מקבלים את המילה who. מי היו הנחקרים? Who were the subjects? So all of this actually makes up components of research.